I'll go ahead and begin this afternoon with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, beloved daughter of the Eternal Father. Hail Mary, admirable Mother of the Son. Hail Mary, faithful spouse of the Holy Ghost. Hail Mary, my dear Mother, my loving mistress, my powerful sovereign. Hail my joy, my glory, my heart and my soul. Destroy in me all that may be displeasing to God. Root it up and bring it to naught. Place and cultivate in me everything that is pleasing to thee. May the light of thy faith dispel the darkness of my mind. May thy profound humility take the place of my pride. May thy continuous sight of God fill my memory with his presence. May the burning love of thy heart inflame the lukewarmness of mine. May thy virtues take the place of my sins. May thy merits be my only adornment in the sight of God, and make up for all that is wanting in me. Finally, dearly beloved Mother, grant, if it be possible, that I may have no other spirit but thine, to know Jesus and his divine will. That I may have no other soul but thine, to praise and glorify the Lord. That I may have no other heart but thine, to love God with a love as pure and ardent as thine. Amen. The first apparition of Our Lady of Fatima took place on Sunday, May the 13th, 1917, at Cova da Iria, a field that's about 2 miles west of the village of Fatima, Portugal. The Most Holy Mother of God came down from heaven to visit 3 shepherd children, Lucia dos Santos, age 10, and her 2 cousins, Francisco Marto, age 9, and Jacinta Marto, age 7. During the first apparition, Lucia asked the beautiful lady, "Where are you from?" "I am from heaven," she replied, gently raising her hand toward the distant horizons. "What do you want of me?" Lucia humbly asked. "I come to ask you to come here for 6 consecutive months on the 13th day at this same hour. I will tell you later who I am and what I want, and I shall return here again a 7th time." "And am I too going to go to heaven?" Lucia asked. "Yes, you shall," the lady assured her. "And Jacinta?" "Yes." "And Francisco?" "He too shall go. But he must say many rosaries," the lady responded. Lucia asked some more questions of the lady. 2 girls who used to come to her house to learn sewing from her sisters had recently died. Lucia wanted to find out about them too. "And Maria do Rosario, daughter of Jose das Neves, is she in heaven?" "Yes," the lady replied. "And Amelia?" "She is still in purgatory." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. How sad that her friend Amelia was suffering in the fires of purgatory. Then the lady said to the children, "Do you want to offer yourselves to God, to endure all the sufferings that he may choose to send you, as an act of reparation for the sins by which he is offended, and as a supplication for the conversion of sinners?" Promptly, Lucia responded for all 3, "Yes, we want to." "Then you are going to suffer a great deal," the lady promised. "But the grace of God will be your comfort." As she pronounced these words, the lady opened her hands and shed upon the children a highly intense light. Lucia reported, "This light penetrated us to the heart and allowed us to see ourselves in God, who was that light, more clearly than we see ourselves in a mirror. Then we were moved by an inward impulse, also communicated to us, to fall on our knees while we repeated to ourselves, O most holy Trinity, I adore thee. My God, I love thee in the most blessed sacrament. Again the lady spoke to them, say the Rosary every day to bring peace to the world and the end of the war. She began then to elevate herself serenely, Lucia said, going in the direction of the east, until she disappeared in the immensity of space, still surrounded by a most brilliant light. Let's start by just taking a few moments to reflect on this first apparition of Our Lady of Fatima. Again, May the 13th, 1917. And I'm going to reflect briefly on 3 points. 1, heaven. 2, to see things in the light of God. And 3, the preeminence of the supernatural. All of these 3 are very much related to each other. So the first one, heaven. One of the things that I'm very grateful to God is that many of the speakers at this conference have spoken about heaven and the importance of heaven, the perspective of eternity. That's absolutely central to our Catholic faith, and it's also at the very heart of the message of Our Lady of Fatima. In terms of this first apparition, really everything in the conversation between Our Lady of Fatima and Lucia has to do with heaven. Our Lady comes from heaven, and then she goes back to heaven. This is very explicit. She motions with her hand towards heaven. Almost as if our Blessed Mother is saying at the very beginning of the Fatima apparitions, this is where you need to be looking to. Your eyes, your heart, your whole being has to be directed towards heaven. Lucia's main concern is getting to heaven. She doesn't ask about her hair or her nails. Her main concern is getting to heaven. She asks, am I going to go to heaven? Our Lady then asks Lucia if she and her cousins would like to sacrifice and offer themselves to God for the conversion of sinners. Basically their vocation. But what she's asking them is if they're willing to make reparation, make sacrifices in order to get sinners off the path to hell and on the path to heaven. Ask yourselves, how often do you reflect and do you ask God and do you ask Our Lady, am I going to go to heaven? Is this your main concern and preoccupation? And if we're truly being faithful Catholics and taking seriously also the message of Our Lady of Fatima, this really would be one of the first things we're doing when we wake up in the morning. Am I going to go to heaven? Are my family members going to go to heaven? How often do you ask yourself that? What about my friends? What can I do to help souls get to heaven? If you sincerely ask yourself that question and ask God and our Blessed Mother for help to know what you can do to help souls get to heaven, that will also open up your eyes to know more clearly what your vocation is. Both Father Shannon and Father Couture spoke about vocation. Number 2, to see things in the light of God. Our Lady of Fatima opened her hands and shed upon the children a highly intense light, which penetrated to their hearts. What the Blessed Virgin Mary does is unite the shepherd children to God. It's something beautiful, very mysterious that is taking place there in the first apparition, and also happens in subsequent apparitions. And what do the children do? They fall down to adore God. They truly see themselves, quote, more clearly than in a mirror, close quote. What happens is that the children see deeper truth than what they can see with their own eyes. And what did the children see in themselves? They saw their need for God. They saw more clearly that they are meant for God. So they fall on their knees to believe, adore, hope, and love God. They see more clearly how they exist to serve and glorify God. And after that moment, their lives are never the same. This is a special grace, but definitely all of you should be praying for this grace of the light of God. Do you try to see things in the light of faith? Or do you just go by what's in front of your nose? For example, do you ask yourself how such an action or decision will affect your soul? Modest dress, for example. How does the way I dress affect my soul? Do you ask yourself this? This is just a small example of what it means to see things in the light of God. Not to see things the way the world sees them, or just what you see with your physical eyes, or what you can think with your brain. What is the deeper truth that is present here? Do your eyes fill with tears at the thought of souls in purgatory? Or are you only saddened by earthly trials? Someone gets sick. Maybe someone is diagnosed in cancer. Someone in our family, somebody very close to us. And, we really feel that. That really is a great blow to us. Do we react the same way when it comes to the holy souls in purgatory? Seeing things in the light of God. And what do you trust more, the words of the Son of God, or what you see, feel, and experience? This is something that we all struggle with. So often we give more credence, we put more trust. Well, I saw this, I felt this, Father, this is what I feel. Well, yes, but what does the Son of God teach us? And if the Son of God teaches us certain things, for example, about what it means to truly love, what it means to truly sacrifice and follow Him, even if I don't necessarily feel that or understand that, what do I place more trust in? So often we place more trust in ourselves, our feelings, what other people think, what other people say, and we fail to see things in the light of God. Some of you here present, I think without question, are called by God to consecrate yourselves totally to Him. Do you see this? And I say, beware of the world, beware of the flesh, beware of the devil. Beware, when I say of the flesh, also of your own thoughts, of your own feelings, of your own way of thinking. Because so often this leads us away from the light of God. I'll make just a few comments right now on the Holy Mass. It's obviously a great, great blessing that the vast majority of you go regularly to the traditional Latin Mass. Never let go of that. This is the Catholic Mass. We must recover our Catholic form of worship. This is absolutely critical. Well, a quick comment on that first apparition. The children, after they see themselves more clearly in the light that is God, they fell down on their knees, and what is it that they prayed? They prayed, "O most holy Trinity, I adore thee. My God, I love thee in the most blessed sacrament." Notice that this is how they responded to the great grace of God's presence. God being made present there at Fatima in a profound way, and the children fall down in adoration. This is how we should be responding at Holy Mass. God is profoundly present at the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Jesus Christ himself becomes present, body, blood, soul, divinity. Truly present there, just as he was present on the cross at Mount Calvary. And how are we responding as a whole? As a whole Catholic Church, not even close to the children at Fatima. And yet at the holy sacrifice of the Mass, we have an even greater manifestation of God's presence. One of the beautiful prayers at the very beginning of Mass, at the prayers at the foot of the altar, is taken from Psalm 42, the Psalm Judica Me, and the priest prays, "Emite lucem tuam et veritatem tuam." He's begging God, send forth thy light and thy truth. And the reason being, or one of the reasons being, so that we, God's children, that we may live and see things in God's light and live according to his truth. It is truly a travesty that this magnificent prayer from Psalm 42, it's completely gone in the new Mass. Inexplicable. What we have to do is we have to allow the Catholic Mass, with the light that it brings from God, to form us. We must never accept man's standards and man's thinking to change the Mass in radical ways, which is what has taken place. We cannot allow the world to shape our thinking about God. And there are many examples of this. You'll hear in many places, in many so-called Catholic circles, you'll be told, even by many priests, well, sin is no big deal, God will forgive you. What do you mean sin is no big deal? Sin is an offense against God, who is holy, holy, holy. Others might tell you, well, it doesn't matter how you dress for Mass because God accepts you as you are. Another lie, not that God doesn't accept you as you are. God certainly loves you, and he loves you as you are, but he's also constantly calling you to love him and to truly live as his daughter, as his son. And because of our love for God, it's extremely important how we live, how we speak, how we dress, how we behave, if in fact we truly believe in God's love for us, and if we truly revere him and honor him in everything, even down to the smallest details. And the third thing, the preeminence of the supernatural. Notice some of the things that are mentioned in this first conversation between Our Lady of Fatima and Lucia. Heaven, purgatory, suffering, and making reparation for the conversion of sinners. The grace of God, also represented by the light. The Blessed Sacrament. The power of the Rosary to bring peace to the world. Just think about how far so many people today, even within the church, are from giving the proper priority to the supernatural. All these people that talk about peace in the world, how faithfully are they praying the Rosary? One of the things that I find so tragic is that pretty much since about I forget the exact year, let's say maybe more or less maybe 1970, maybe 1969, 1968, around maybe a little bit after the close of the Second Vatican Council, the popes in Rome began this kind of custom of, on January the 1st, of praying for peace and of giving an address to all the world for peace. And they mention the different places in the world where there are wars, and they call on different people and different nations and different governments and maybe even different world leaders to work for peace and to fight for peace in the United Nations and for peace and different things. And I ask myself, and yet none of them have consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary as they've been commanded by God. It's setting aside what is supernatural, even though it's a direct command from God and our Blessed Mother, setting it aside in favor of what is natural and what man thinks is going to work and what man thinks will bring about results. Something that I think is also extremely important, this especially will be a reminder for the young men, and maybe I'll say just a little bit about it because it's applicable also to the young women who would not have heard Father Isaac's talk yesterday. But if you consider all of the different aids that Father Isaac mentioned yesterday, aids that are absolutely necessary to live a chaste life, guess what? All of those aids basically are supernatural aids. If we're going to get to heaven and if we're going to live a life that is pleasing to God, we need supernatural aid. And Fatima, in many ways, is emphasizing the preeminence of the supernatural. Father Isaac, for example, he mentioned praying the Rosary. And praying the Rosary daily, praying the Rosary faithfully, not thinking that this is, well, just something optional. To live a chaste life, to love God, you have to pray the Rosary every day. He mentioned mental prayer. Mental prayer has to do with the supernatural, and that's why a lot of times we find it difficult. You're reflecting on supernatural truths, on the goodness of God, the love of God, the justice of God, the mercy of God, the truths of our Catholic faith that have been directly revealed by God. Mental prayer, what it's doing is it's opening the door for your soul into the supernatural. You have to be nourished by that. And that's exactly what our Blessed Mother is doing at Fatima. She's nourishing the shepherd children and she's nourishing the world with a greater sense of the supernatural. And Father Isaac also mentioned the presence of God and meditating upon the four last things. That's what Our Lady of Fatima is doing. Heaven, hell, purgatory. Think about it. The children actually saw hell. You have to do your best also in prayer to see in the light of God the reality of heaven, the reality of hell. In terms of the presence of God, to always try to make yourself aware in faith, God is here present. The more, for example, you are entering in faith in the presence of God at Holy Mass, well, the more you're going to be able to also practice the presence of God at different moments during your day. But all of this is the supernatural. There's a very beautiful prayer that you have in your Angelus Press 1962 Missal. It's actually on page 28. And what it says is, I'll just read it to you. This too, the supernatural, just as an example so that you can go to it often on page 28. Remember then, O Christian soul, that thou hast this day and every day of thy life God to glorify, Jesus to imitate, the angels and the saints to invoke, a soul to save, a body to mortify, sins to expiate, virtues to acquire, hell to avoid, heaven to gain, eternity to prepare for, time to profit by, neighbors to edify, the world to despise, devils to combat, passions to subdue, death perhaps to suffer, and judgment to undergo. It's a very beautiful prayer because it's trying to focus each Christian soul on what he has to do that day, and it has to do with the supernatural. It doesn't say you have to eat your food and go to the bathroom and do your exercise and read a book and talk on the phone and talk to your friends. At Fatima, Our Lady comes to lead souls to God. She comes to save poor souls from hell and from the devil. And it stands to reason that in this most extraordinary apparition of our Blessed Mother in all of the history of Christianity, that it's so extraordinary because there's an extraordinary need of poor souls for help to be saved from hell and from the devil. St. Alphonsus Liguori, doctor of the Church, teaches, quote, "One thing is necessary, the salvation of our souls. It is not necessary to be great, noble, or rich in this world, or to enjoy uninterrupted health, but it is necessary to save our souls. For this has God placed us here, not to acquire honors, riches, or pleasures, but to acquire by our good works that eternal kingdom, which is prepared for those who during this present life fight against and overcome the enemies of their eternal salvation." Close quote. In terms of also trying to discern your vocation, in terms of trying to overcome horrible vices of impurity, think about this very important teaching of St. Alphonsus and also of the Catholic Church. There's one thing that's necessary: the salvation of our souls. St. Alphonsus Liguori continues, quote, "The business of eternal salvation is to us the most important of all business, but it is also the most neglected by Christians. To save their souls, the greater number of Christians do nothing. On the contrary, they do everything to bring their souls to perdition. They live as if death, judgment, hell, and heaven and eternity were not truths of faith, but fables invented by poets. If a person lose a lawsuit or a harvest crop, how great is his pain and distress of mind? With what zeal does he labor to repair the loss? If worldlings lose a horse or a dog, with what diligence do they seek after it? But if they lose the grace of God, they sleep and jest and laugh." Close quote. And so our Blessed Mother at Fatima, what she's doing is she's emphasizing again in a very dramatic and forceful and loving and gentle as only a mother can way, what the Catholic Church has always taught. That what is most important is the salvation of our souls. That's why she came down from heaven at Fatima. And that's why she presents to us also a very beautiful plan, which in many ways is the plan of the gospel, the plan of her Son, obviously. Right now I want to take just a few moments to emphasize, in general, the importance of our Blessed Mother and how she leads souls to heaven. That's what she does. She leads souls to heaven. St. Thomas Aquinas says, quote, "God has entrusted the keys and treasures of heaven to Mary," close quote. St. Bonaventure says, quote, "No one can enter into heaven except through Mary, as entering through a gate," close quote. St. John Marie Vianney, quote, "All the saints have a great devotion to Our Lady. No grace comes from heaven without passing through her hands. We cannot go into a house without speaking to the doorkeeper. Well, the Holy Virgin is the doorkeeper of heaven," close quote. Pope Leo XIII, in his encyclical letter Adiutricem on the Rosary, dated September the 5th, 1895. Quote, "It is impossible to measure the power and scope of her offices since the day she was taken up to that height of heavenly glory in the company of her Son. From her heavenly abode, she began by God's decree to watch over the church, to assist and befriend us as our mother, so that she who was intimately associated with the mystery of human salvation is just as closely associated with the distribution of the graces, which for all time will flow from the redemption. The power thus put into her hands is all but unlimited." Close quote. We've got 2 quotes left. 3 quotes left. But again, keep paying attention to how the popes and the saints are describing the importance of the Blessed Virgin Mary and also her very close connection to the salvation of souls, the power to save souls, and her closeness to heaven. She is in heaven. She's bringing souls to heaven. The doorkeeper to the gate of heaven. No one enters heaven except through her. If no one enters heaven except through her, what is it that she does? She's trying to get as many of her Son's children to come to her so they can enter through her to get to heaven. Blessed Pope Pius IX, in his encyclical letter Ubi Primum on the Immaculate Conception, February the 2nd, 1849, quote, "For God has committed to Mary the treasury of all good things, in order that everyone may know that through her are obtained every hope, every grace, and all salvation. For this is his will, that we obtain everything through Mary." Close quote. And again, Blessed Pope Pius IX, this is in his Apostolic Constitution, Ineffabilis Deus, December the 8th, 1854, where he proclaimed the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. Quote, "Let all the children of the Catholic Church continue to venerate, invoke, and pray to the Most Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, conceived without original sin. Let them fly with utter confidence to this most sweet Mother of mercy and grace in all dangers, difficulties, needs, doubts, and fears. Under her guidance, under her patronage, under her kindness and protection, nothing is to be feared, nothing is hopeless, because while bearing toward us a truly motherly affection and having in her care the work of our salvation, she is solicitous about the whole human race." Close quote. This is one of the reasons why yesterday Father Isaac mentioned the importance of devotion to our Blessed Mother if we're going to live a chaste life. Because listen to the words again. Blessed Pope Pius IX says that under her guidance, under her protection, with her help, nothing is to be feared, nothing is hopeless. Even the most terrible attacks of the devil, even those who are laboring under great wounds of sin, their own or those of others. And because right now, truly, our world and Holy Mother Church is going through a terrible, terrible time, our Blessed Mother has been there and is there, Fatima, for our times. An extraordinary intervention on the part of the Mother of God. And the final quote is from St. Bernard of Clairvaux. Hopefully you remember that Father Shannon spoke at length about him yesterday in terms of vocation. This is a quote by St. Bernard of Clairvaux, a beautiful one. Quote, "In dangers, in doubts, in difficulties, think of Mary, call upon Mary. Let not her name depart from your lips. Never suffer it to leave your heart. And that you may obtain the assistance of her prayer, neglect not to walk in her footsteps. With her for your guide, you shall never go astray. While invoking her, you shall never lose heart. So long as she is in your mind, you are safe from deception. While she holds your hand, You cannot fall. Under her protection, you have nothing to fear. If she walks before you, you shall not grow weary. If she shows you favor, you shall reach the goal. Close quote. I chose these quotes in the hope that this can motivate and inspire all of you, that even if you forget a lot of the details that you've heard during these days at this Fatima conference, that one resolution that all of you will make is, I definitely want to grow in my love and in my devotion, in my trust in the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I am going to be a more faithful, more devout Marian Catholic, if you want to use that terminology. I'll move on now to part 2 of my talk, and this is just a very quick summary of the Fatima apparitions. Another thing that I strongly ask all of you to do is please, Kevin Diaz, he mentioned this right before my talk, but I'll say it again because it's so important. Please do make this also a resolution so that there's fruit from this Fatima conference. And take your little books that he mentioned that are called The True Story of Fatima and read it. And encourage others to also read it. And read it even more than once. As Kevin mentioned, excellent spiritual reading. There's such a richness of God's grace and God's love and God's mercy, and really just the light of God. I mean, what I was saying earlier, the supernatural in Fatima, that we need to nourish ourselves with this great gift that God has given us, this great intervention on the part of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I cannot right now go through all the wealth and riches of the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima. A good starting point, and I say just a starting point, is for you to read this book or booklet. Very quickly, a summary of the Fatima apparitions. The Fatima apparitions can be summarized as follows. There are 12 major divine interventions. First, we have the 3 appearances of the Angel of Peace in 1916 to the 3 shepherd children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta. Next come the 6 appearances of Our Lady at Cova da Iria, near the village of Fatima, Portugal. And these took place from May the 13th to October the 13th, 1917, one each month. Finally, there are 3 very significant post-1917 apparitions of Our Lady to Sister Lucia. In December 1925 at Pontevedra, Spain, and she appears with the Christ child. Then also in June of 1929 at Tui, Spain, and in January of 1944, again at Tui, Spain. In 1925, Our Lady came to request the communion of reparation of the first Saturdays of 5 consecutive months. In 1929, she asked for the solemn consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart by the Holy Father and all the world's bishops in union with him. And in 1944, Our Lady directed Sister Lucia to write down the 3rd secret and ordered that it be revealed to the world no later than 1960. Now, to move on, there are 7 key things which God asks of us through Our Lady of Fatima. 7 key things which God asks of us. Number 1, the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Still hasn't taken place. And this was asked for from heaven in 1929. I think it's so sad that right now in our Catholic Church, there's so many faithful Catholics, many of them traditional Catholics, priestly fraternity, like for example, the Society of St. Pius X. So many that have been unjustly accused and attacked of supposedly being disobedient. And yet here we see the greatest disobedience that has been taking place now since 1929. from the popes. They are to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary in union with the world's bishops. It's 1929. Still they haven't done it. Pope after pope after pope after pope after pope. And then you can add on that since 1960, the Pope being commanded to reveal the third secret to the world, and as if one grave act of disobedience was not enough, added on a second since 1960. Every single Pope since 1960 has disobeyed that command. How can we be surprised if God sees the need to chastise His church when she is being so disobedient in matters so important? And that's the second thing. The first one, as I mentioned, 7 key things which God asks of us through Our Lady of Fatima. 1, the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. 2, to reveal the third secret to the entire world. It still has not been done. As Kevin mentioned right now, just before I began speaking, it's true that in the year 2000, part of that third secret was revealed, but not the entire third secret. And that's not what Our Lady asked for in 1960. She didn't say, you reveal part of the third secret, the part that you think is convenient or that you think is applicable. So there again, those 2 major requests, commands from heaven, that's part of the message of Our Lady of Fatima, still haven't been done. Number 3, to pray the Rosary daily. Number 4, to wear the brown scapular, which includes the promise to live chastely. Number 5, to be faithful in accomplishing one's daily duty according to one's state of life. And this applies to bishops, priests, fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, children. This request, command, part of the message of Fatima, to be faithful to accomplishing one's daily duty according to one's state of life. It applies first and foremost to the hierarchy, the Pope, the bishops, the priests. And oh, how we failed. Rather than being faithful to our daily duties and our true vocation, we've made radical changes to all these things in the aftermath of the Second Vatican Council. And then number 6, to make reparation, pray and sacrifice for the conversion of poor sinners. And number 7, on the first Saturdays of each month, make special reparation for sins against the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And that's the devotion of the first 5 Saturdays. As Kevin also mentioned, you have an explanation of that and of a lot of these different elements, specific elements of the message of Our Lady of Fatima in your packets. Use them. I know the temptation is going to be, you get back home and, okay, I'm back to my normal life, and you put your packet there in a drawer somewhere, and a month later it's still there. Don't let that happen. Go through the material. And notice how these 7 things that I just finished mentioning, notice how all of them, they have to do with the salvation of souls. Getting to heaven. Number 1, the conversion of Russia. Well, this has to do with the conversion of an entire nation to the one true Catholic faith, outside of which there's no salvation. Without the Catholic faith, there is no salvation. The conversion of Russia, conversion primarily to the Catholic faith, so that that nation can be saved. Number 2, about revealing the third secret to the world. It's almost 100% certain that what is yet to be revealed as part of the third secret, that it's a divine warning about the gravest dangers to the salvation of souls, namely attacks on Catholic worship and Catholic doctrine. Very, very likely that in that third secret, there's a warning from God, from our Blessed Mother, to beware of attacks on Catholic doctrine and on Catholic worship, the liturgy. And this was supposed to be revealed in 1960. Almost saying, beware, beware, because these grave attacks are coming. Very possibly even from the highest levels of the church. and see the connection. How are souls going to get to heaven if Catholic doctrine is not preached in its truth and in its fullness? If there is not the true worship of God, Catholic worship, authentic Catholic worship, the traditional Latin Mass, how are souls going to be saved? And then numbers 3 and 4, the Rosary and the Scapular. Notice how these are divine, infallible weapons in the battle for souls. Those souls that truly hold on to the Rosary and the Scapular, you will be saved, you will get to heaven. And then number 5, about being faithful to one's daily duties. This is basic to the salvation of each soul. And notice how being faithful to your daily duty, like praying the Rosary and wearing the brown scapular, these are available to each individual soul, regardless of infidelity on the part of the hierarchy to numbers 1 and 2. Consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and revealing the entire third sacred. Even if our shepherds, many of them wolves, even if our shepherds do not fulfill what they are commanded to do, in terms of Fatima 3, 4, and 5, each individual soul can do his or her part. And if he or she does it faithfully, that soul will get to heaven. And finally, numbers 6 and 7, in terms of making reparation, praying and sacrificing for the conversion of poor sinners, and the first 5 Saturday devotion also in reparation for sins against the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Notice how this is contributing to the salvation of souls that are in grave danger of being lost. The sinners, the ones that are committing blasphemies. We have to do our part to also help them get to heaven and to intercede for them. And that's the key things that God is asking of us through our Blessed Mother at Fatima. I now move on to the third and final part of my talk, and that is the Immaculate Heart of Mary and purity of heart. At the second apparition of Our Lady of Fatima on June the 13th, 1917, Lucia asked the Virgin Mary once again to take her and her cousins to heaven. The Most Holy Mother of God replied as follows, quote, "I will take Jacinta and Francisco soon, but you, Lucia, are to stay here sometime longer. Jesus wishes to make use of you in order to make me known and loved. He wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. To whoever embraces this devotion, I promise salvation. My Immaculate Heart will be your refuge and the way that will lead you to God." Close quote. Note how everything here still has to do with heaven and the salvation of souls, even to the point that the Most Holy Mother of God is promising salvation to those who embrace this devotion. It's incredible. In our desperate times, God has willed to give greater prominence and access to the Immaculate Heart of His Most Holy Mother. Why? What's this about? I say truly desperate times because, again, today we are living in times of diabolical disorientation. There are very few places within the church we love, very few places within the Catholic Church, where it's not being taught, for example, that all religions are equal. This is diabolical disorientation, and this is everywhere. This kind of idea that all religions are equal and that everyone can believe in God in the way that they feel is right. This is completely diabolical. There's so many in the church hierarchy that seek to adapt church teaching, discipline, and piety rather than transmit these faithfully. And this is their first duty. We're talking about Fatima and doing one's daily duty. The most important duty of the Pope and the bishops and then the priests, to transmit faithfully these pearls of great price. The pearl of great price, Matthew 13:46. To transmit faithfully these pearls of great price, which are Catholic Church teaching, Catholic discipline, Catholic piety, the Mass, the sacraments. That's why I say we're truly living in desperate times. So, in these desperate times, God wills to give us God is so good. He wills to give us greater access to the Immaculate Heart of His Mother. Why? Well, first of all, note this, that in the words of our Blessed Mother, it's very clear that Mary's Immaculate Heart, it's not an end in itself. Her Immaculate Heart will lead us to God. You can replace there also to heaven, to God who is in heaven. The end is God and heaven, life everlasting with God. Listen to what St. John Eudes says about the heart of Mary. I'm going to give you two quotes. Try to listen very carefully to them, because if you take these two quotes from the saints to heart, you will begin to appreciate much, much more why God has willed now in our times to give us greater access, to give greater prominence to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And this is what St. John Eudes says, quote, "The unique heart of Our Lady never knew any love other than the purest love of God. It never suffered from the multiplicity of superfluous thoughts, aimless desires, and vain affections, which usually fill and divide the miserable hearts of the children of Adam. Her heart held one thought, one purpose, one will, one intention, one single affection, and one desire only, to please God and to fulfill in all things and everywhere His adorable will." Close quote. And then St. John Damascene, Doctor of the Church, praising Mary, states, quote, "Thy pure and immaculate heart is always turned toward thy beloved, and is applied only to contemplate him, to desire him, to seek him, and to aspire after him." Close quote. Mary's Immaculate Heart will be the way that leads us to God, because it has one thought, one purpose, one will, one intention, one single affection, one desire only: to please God and to do His holy will. That's the kind of heart that all of you, that all of us need, not only to get to heaven, but also to discern our vocation, which is going to be our path, the path that God has set for us to be able to get to heaven. Her Immaculate Heart is always and totally turned toward God, to contemplate Him, to desire Him, to seek Him, to aspire after Him, to know Him, to love Him, to serve Him. It's the only thing her heart does. And her heart does it perfectly, without blemish, without deviation. This is why her heart is immaculate. Literally, without blemish, without stain, without any deviation. No deviation from this one thought, one intention, one single affection, God. Very, very quickly, I just want to make this comment, because this is an objection of many Protestants, heretics, many Catholics who don't know their faith well. Unfortunately, many of them heretics as well. But many of them say, well, how come so much emphasis on the Immaculate Heart of Mary? What about Jesus? What about Jesus? Well, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, it's all due to her divine Son, Jesus. This does not take away from the fact that Jesus is the only way to the Father. Rather, it shows that there is a perfect union between Jesus and Mary, a union to which all of us are called. The point is that Jesus is perfectly present in his mother's heart. It is here that his grace is most perfectly at work. Listen to the testimony again of the saints. Listen carefully. St. John Eudes and St. Louis de Montfort. St. John Eudes, quote, "Jesus lives in Mary's soul and in her body, and in each faculty of her body and soul. He lives in her entirely, which means that whatever is in Jesus is also in Mary. His heart abides in her heart, his soul in her soul, his spirit in her spirit. His virtues, mysteries, and divine attributes are living in her heart. So it is that Jesus is the principle of life in his most holy mother. So it is that he is the heart of her heart and the life of her life. St. Bridget once heard Our Lady say, 'Every homage rendered to my Son is likewise rendered to me, and who dishonors him dishonors me.' We have always had such perfect mutual love that we seemed to have, as it were, but one heart for both." Close quote. And St. Louis de Montfort, quote, "The strongest inclination of Mary is to unite us to Jesus Christ, her Son, and the strongest inclination of the Son is that we should come to him through his Holy Mother." Close quote. So Mary's heart is set completely and totally on God, and only on God. This is what makes her heart pure, immaculate. This purity of heart, after the example of Mary's immaculate heart, is the way that will lead us to God. This is exactly what our Savior Jesus Christ teaches in Matthew 5, verse 8, the sixth of the 8 Beatitudes. Quote, "Blessed are the pure of heart," or the clean of heart. "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God." Close quote. Again, it's purity of heart, the way that will lead us to God. And so I'm finishing up here just saying a little bit about purity of heart. Purity of heart consists in having nothing therein which is, in however small a degree, opposed to God and the operation of his grace. Obviously, this isn't something that's easy to achieve, but you have to start by knowing that this is the goal. Hopefully, each one of you will leave from this conference with that as a goal, to say, I desire above all, I'm not worried about being famous. I'm not worried about being the smartest or the most handsome or the most beautiful or the most popular or the most successful, but I desire above all a pure heart, like the heart of my mother. Because it's not easy to achieve this is why devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary is so important. I'm going to conclude by just giving you 3 counsels. The first one is, make this the goal of your life, a pure heart. Because when you do that, what you're making as the goal of your life is heaven. That's what's going to get you to heaven. It's going to be the way that leads you to God. And I will say this, that already you have a better start than many in this regard when it comes to having a pure heart. Part of having a pure heart is also having a pure mind. I'm going to speak in the sermon that I will give in Mass this evening. I'm going to speak about a pure mind. But you already have a great advantage in terms of a pure heart and a pure mind because you're young. And even though it's different now than even 20, 50, 70 years ago, I mean, there was a lot more innocence and purity among the youth in years past than now. Even in spite of that, because you're young, you're still in a better position in terms of that purity of heart and purity of mind than many, because there haven't been more years of filling your minds and your hearts with a lot of impurities and a lot of things of just this world and not of God. And by the very fact that you're Catholic, and many of you traditional Catholics, that's also a very great blessing in terms of having a pure mind. That is, a mind that is being nourished by the Catholic faith, by the truths that the Catholic Church has always taught, not by a lot of these novelties and modernism that is wrecking the Church. So make this the goal of your life. My first counsel, purity of heart. Number 2, practice devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I could say more about this, but, you know, I'm out of time. You have your packets. This will motivate you, hopefully, to keep learning more and researching. And then number 3, examine your hearts. This goes back also to one of the advice that Father Isaac gave yesterday about examine your conscience. I'm using slightly different wording, but it's the same thing. Examine your heart. And fight your heart out against sin. And even the first disordered movements of your heart. That's what I mean when I say examine your heart, to be very vigilant. Even when you begin to see those first disordered movements of your heart, not even necessarily any sin yet, be very vigilant, fight against that. If we examine our own interior, we will surely find therein a multitude of desires and disordered appetites for the honors, the pleasures, and the comforts of the world, unceasingly fermenting in our heart. Our hearts are so full of false ideas, erroneous judgments, disorderly affections, passions, and malice. Remember what St. John Eudes says. He says that the miserable hearts of the children of Adam suffer because they are filled and divided. There isn't that unity, that oneness, like in the Immaculate Heart of Mary that we just heard. One thought, one purpose, one affection. So here St. John Eudes says that our miserable hearts suffer because they're filled and divided by superfluous thoughts, aimless desires, and vain affections. And if you pile those on year after year after year after year, gets more and more difficult to have a pure heart. That's why I say that all of you, even just by the fact that you're still young, that in itself is still a blessing. And we could even add to what St. John Eudes say, we may add that they are also, our miserable hearts are also filled with the deadly sins: pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, anger, and sloth. I'm almost finished. Just one word about sin. Pay close attention here. Even minor sins, when voluntary, when you commit them voluntarily, they inflict 4 evils on the souls. I'm going to mention those 4 evils. But again, remember this, even minor sins. This is just so that you begin to think, well, what happens then if I'm leading a life day after day, week after week, month after month, even year after year, of sin, of committing sin and even living in sin, living in, for example, mortal sin, which is the worst. Even minor sins, when voluntary, inflict 4 evils on the soul. 1, sin darkens and blinds the soul more and more. Very different from Fatima, seeing things in the light of God. Here, sin darkens and blinds the soul more and more. 2, sin sullies the soul. It soils and stains it. 3, sin disturbs and oppresses the soul. It robs it of its peace. I think it was John Henry, yes, in just the talk we heard. He was talking about how he had no peace. I think he said something like interiorly, it was a horrible life. That's sin. Sin disturbs and oppresses the soul. It robs it of peace. And sin enfeebles the soul. It diminishes its strength. Your strength, your love for God, your faith, all of this is getting weakened. And again, remember, even minor sins, they inflict these 4 evils on the soul. And because of this, we ought to avoid, this has to do with examining your heart and being vigilant. We ought to avoid all waste of time and never do or think of anything which is not to the glory of God. For want of this, we make very little progress and attach our heart to 1,000 objects which disturb and distract it in prayer. Unless we combat as strenuously against the first disorderly movement of the heart, as against sin itself, we shall never thoroughly correct our vices. Say to yourself, I want my heart to be like your heart, Blessed Mother, help me. Mary's Immaculate Heart is to be your refuge and the way that will lead you to God. Amen. We pray. This is a salutation to the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary by St. John Eudes, and he's saluting the Sacred Hearts as one heart. Hail, heart most holy. Hail, heart most humble. Hail, heart most pure. Hail, most loving heart of Jesus and Mary. We adore thee, we praise thee, we glorify thee, we give thee thanks. We love thee with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our strength. We offer thee our heart. We give it to thee. We consecrate it to thee. We immolate it to thee. Receive it and possess it wholly. Purify it, enlighten it, sanctify it, that thou mayest live and reign in it now, always, and forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. May God bless you all.